Good morning and greetings on World Environment Day. I would like to thank IISER Pune for giving this opportunity to interact with you on topic of environment education, learning from nature and people. A brief introduction. I work with Center for Environment Education, widely known as CEE. CEE was established in 1984 by Ministry of Environment and Forest Climate Change as a center of excellence for the field of environment education. And it operates through its network of regional cells, state offices and project offices all over the country. And its work is spread across different thematic areas such as environment education in formal system, biodiversity conservation education, nature interpretation and nature experiencing, sustainable rural development program and sustainable urban development program and such. This is to cater to the different and emerging needs of environmental conservation, capacity building and learning resource development. Before we get into today's topic of understanding environment education and how we can learn from nature and people, let me quickly provide you with some introduction about how environment education has evolved over decades, especially in the modern times. Many of you must be knowing that it was in 1973, United Nations General Assembly earlier year established World Environment Day. And in 1973, first World Environment Day was celebrated all across the world. There is a context, both global as well as local. Globally, we were experiencing impacts of rapid urbanization, economic growth, and there were serious signs emerging that our ecosystems are having problems due to pollution, loss of wildlife, and air pollution, and so on. So when we look at global milestones of environmental conservation movement, we need to essentially look at Stockholm Declaration, which was declared in 1972 by the UN Conference on Human Environment. In 1977, specifically in context of environment education, Tbilisi Conference actually established the former scope, objective and guidelines for environment education globally. And 1992 Earth Summit, or Rio Summit as it is popularly known, is also quite well known globally. So these are few milestones when it comes to global environmental movement. And as I mentioned, that 1977 Tbilisi Conference created the scope and definition for environment education. So after that, environment education has evolved, which largely started as nature education, nature-centered philosophies into a structured global framework which attempts to deal with complex issues of sustainable development. To address anthropogenic industrial impacts such as pollution and eventually systemic and lifelong sustainability and climate actions as we speak today. And we at CE firmly believe that education needs to be considered not as a basic good, but the role of education as driver of drivers when it comes to sustainable development is often underappreciated. We all know that the developmental process, as it is largely understood, is driven by many factors. Let us call them drivers. Which are these drivers? Of course, policies and programs, the legal frameworks, the enforcement system. Also, increasingly, technology is shaping our development. Economics, in way of finances and various products and their availability, also shape the way development happens. But then, role of education, not only in understanding the nature of these drivers which are shaping our developmental course, but also informing and influencing these drivers so that collectively our developmental process becomes more sustainable is often underappreciated. So education has to play this critical role of influencing the way policies and programs are framed, the way communities understand these policies and frameworks, the way we need to create incentives for sustainable practices and sustainable policies. So we will try to unpack this role of education as driver of drivers for sustainable development in today's session as we move ahead. Before we get into some of the stories and case studies, let me also touch upon an important topic of indigenization. For new national educational policy, indigenization has emerged as an important topic. In context of environment education, what this indigenization exactly means. We just saw the milestones and the global context in which environment education has evolved. The broad philosophies guiding environment education, especially in the modern time, have evolved in what we refer as a global West or the so-called developed world. No doubt, lot of developmental process, lot of technologies, lot of systems, be it market mechanisms or institutional, are coming from West. So certainly we need to pay attention towards what Western philosophies and Western thinking is emerging in terms of environment education. But that doesn't mean that we cannot or we need not contextualize environment education to our own realities in the context of India. This contextualization can be done in many ways, and that need not remain at the level of India, which is really a diverse country with hundreds of languages, different cultures, different worldviews, different ideas of development, and different lived experiences when it comes to nature or various ecosystems. But let us start at the level of India as a country. How we can contextualize, how we can explore indigenization of philosophy behind environment education, inspirations for environment education. So let me share a couple of examples. This is not an exhaustive list, but just few examples to get started, and then you all are welcome to find your own context, find the inspirational examples which can guide environment education for your context, your community, your school. So first example I would like to share is that of Samrat Ashok. We all know that largely 3rd century before Common Era is the period of Samrat Ashok, and thankfully due to many rock edicts his reign has left in vast empire that he managed, which includes area beyond present day India, in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and most of current day India. So from the rock edicts of Samrat Ashok, we get to understand an ancient philosophy of governance which valued nature, which valued environment, which valued not just human welfare but also welfare of all life forms, including domesticated animals. So we come to know that Samrat Ashok has created some of the earliest wildlife protection laws. He has banned mass slaughter and sacrifice of animals in the name of religion. He adopted policy of afforestation and green infrastructure development. We see that it was Ashokan time. It might have preceded his time as well, but what we know from the historical evidence that at least from his time we have this tradition of creating various orchards like mango orchards and plantations on the sides of highways for the benefit of travelers by way of providing shade as well as fruits. He also created lot of medicinal gardens, and there are evidences to show that he created these medicinal gardens across the highways crossing the length and breadth of India as well as the neighboring countries beyond Pakistan and modern day Afghanistan. He established dedicated healthcare facilities and watering for animals alongside human hospitals. He also strictly banned forest and habitat fires. He also established seasonal fishing restrictions, and he also created institutional mechanisms to effectively enforce this governance policy. And it is quite marvelous to see that more than 2,300 years ago, he was thinking in terms of need for environmental conservation, what kind of policies and enforcement institutions are required, that even we are struggling to create today. Let us look at what's happening with plantation activity around our highways. I mean, how many highways we can really point at as world-class highways when it comes to not just the infrastructure for transportation, but also exemplary sites for plantation, creating shade, and as also various environmental and ecological benefits for travelers and immediate wildlife. We are far behind perhaps what our ancestors like Samrat Ashok achieved more than 2 millennia ago. So certainly we can take inspiration. There is a philosophical base as well as historical evidences of how systematically we can protect our environment. And it is up to us to provide philosophical foundations for environmental education content as well as its implementation. And certainly we can learn from examples like Samrat Ashok. Now let us come to another personality, that of Mahatma Phule, especially when it comes to environment education, which is increasingly understood now because it attempts to deal with complexities and complex challenges thrown by the developmental process. And that's how we increasingly refer it as education for sustainable development. I consider Mahatma Phule as a pioneer of modern Indian Education for Sustainable Development, or ESD. Way back in 1882, when Britishers established a commission to create an educational policy, Mahatma Jyotiba Phule made a historic memorandum submission to this British commission, which is popularly known as Hunter Commission, where he sharply criticized the colonial downward filtration theory and demanded that the state resources be redirected from the elite higher education to the primary schooling of the laboring masses. So he was talking about priority for state-funded primary education. He was advocating for compulsory education for all, a decentralized funding. He was talking about equity and incentives, advocating special scholarships and prizes to overcome extreme poverty and motivate especially the lower caste class parents and to keep their children in school. He also has articulated about nature of education. So he talks about utility and life-centric education. What he mean by it? He gives emphasis on vocational, science, secular and egalitarian education. Each of these terms are quite loaded, and I would encourage each of you to explore these terms in depth and try to understand in your context. So he advocated promoting humanism, critical thinking and social equality. He also advocated for teacher qualification. And in terms of educational content, he speaks of need to include agriculture as a subject. And he proposed practical agriculture to be taught as essential, foundational component of the rural school curriculum. and his intentions were agrarian modernization through education, which ultimately leads towards combating alienation of the masses from educational process, overcoming challenges of agriculture and poverty alleviation. So if we really look at what he was talking way back in 1882, he was talking about compulsory education. He was talking about economics, larger economics, poverty alleviation, as well as economics to support public education. And he was talking about social sustainability, looking at marginalization and extending universal education, reaching to the masses of it. So environment, economics and social, all three dimensions on which the Western idea of education for sustainable development stands today. I mean, we find that we certainly can learn from Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, because he was essentially talking about education, not merely looking at nature conservation, but also looking at economics and social domains of ESD as well. We need to ask question whether we are recognizing contributions of our own educational philosophers and social reformers. If we start doing that, that is what I refer to indigenization of environment education or indigenization of education for sustainable development. Now, third and last, let us talk about an example, inspiration or a community-based institution where we can organize environment education in our own context. Here I recollect experiences from various countries, Japan in specific. When it comes to non-formal education, Japan has a traditional institution where the modern Japanese government has invested hugely, that is called as kominkans. The kominkan is a traditional institution now funded by government but managed by the local community, where they talk and teach about local language, local culture, local culinary practices. And I myself have experienced very interesting classes for young mothers preparing nutritious traditional dishes for infants over there. Japan as a society and Japanese government has able to do this indigenization looking at their own institutional models. We need to ask question whether we are looking at Indian models or not, or we are just borrowing these models from the West or any other country. Nothing bad in learning from good examples emerging out of anywhere in the world. But then we need to ask whether we are devoid of such examples. Certainly not. We as a civilizational country, one of the oldest civilizations the world has seen, have ample institutions, ancient institutions to take inspiration from. Let me share an example of Gotul. Some of you from central India might have heard this term Gotul. So what is Gotul? So Gotul is an ancient traditional institution attributed to Maurya Gond Adivasi community, which inhabits central India from Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Chhattisgarh to Orissa. And they have this unique institution Gotul where young boys and girls are members. They spend a significant time of their life in this institutional space. This is a community created space. There is a traditional house structure, there is an open space, and there is a space for the ruling deity of Gotul, that is Lingopane. The philosophical foundation of Gotul also is a fascinating one. Within the premise of Gotul, Gond Adivasis believe that there is nothing like a sin. This is a powerful concept. And during their formative years, these Adivasi boys and girls not just learn to dance and sing and have fun, but they also learn about their community culture, their tradition. They learn about forest, they learn about agriculture. They learn about normative frameworks which are evolved over millennia through the interaction of these Adivasi communities with their immediate environment. They have many sustainability practices. They have converted into the social, moral and ethical fabrics of these communities. And they learn great stewardship, not just towards the environment, but also towards their community. So, and even Western academicians who have studied the institutions like Gotul, like late Verrier Elwin, they have recognized that perhaps Gotul is world's most evolved, complex and advanced traditional, non-formal, youth-centric learning institution. We need to ask question, are we talking about this as a heritage, this as an inspirational institution? And especially in the context of environment education, where we are worried about what is happening with our forests, grasslands, wetlands, rivers. Certainly, examples like Gotul not just can become inspirational because they are evolved in our own soils and forests, but also they are complex enough to enable us to deal with complex challenges thrown by the developmental process today. Gotul is just one institution. We need to look around, and I am sure that we will be able to locate such inspirations locally in each of the state, within state, each of the region, which has different language, different culture. Let me share one contemporary such inspiration. In Maharashtra, I come from the western Maharashtrian region, specifically the Kolhapur district. This region has a quite a vibrant youth institution called Tarun Mandals, and they exist at least for some generations that I know. And this youth mandal take active role in conducting various festivals, in conducting social events. But then we as environment educators need to ask question whether we are looking towards these Tarun Mandals as potential institutions. We can engage for environment education and we can engage as force multipliers to achieve widespread conservation actions. So similarly, I would like to encourage you to explore, talk to the communities around you and find such inspirational examples. It could be simple practices, it could be such institutions, but if we engage with it, we design our environment educational activity around it, it will provide immense strength to environmental education as a process. So before going into some of the case stories which I have today for you, how environment education can be done in an effective manner, after understanding the global context and the way and the need for indigenization of environment education, both in terms of content as well as transaction and practices, I would like to share or rather flag an important aspect when it comes to nature, wildlife and use of social media. So social media as a tool can be effectively used for reaching out to the masses, also creating resources which potentially are more effective than many of conventional resources. But at the same time, social media and technologies like artificial intelligence have become challenge in itself. This is true for any of the thematic area, not just environment education or nature education, but here I would like to emphasize that by citing some examples from what broadly understood as nature or wildlife. Many of you must have come across various posts which have gone through WhatsApp or other social media platforms where elements from nature have been taken, distorted or created a fabricated organisms to create panic, spread fear or superstition. For example, I remember, it keeps making round year after year, a post of umber or cluster fig tree with a mushroom or a fungus grown on it. And that particular post talks about once in a lifetime a rare flower of such cluster fig tree, or inflorescence of a cycad tree shown as a rare flower of umber, and then this is a gift of some Swami Samartha or any other local Baba. And millions of people are actually not only seeing but mindlessly forwarding these posts, spreading superstition without making any effort to understand how exactly flowers of this umber fig tree look like, and ability to distinguish between the flowers and fungus and inflorescence of any other tree. Similarly, post of some rare flowers from Himalaya also are going viral, and they may contain flowers from Americas. Some of the posts included images of marine animals which were used to spread superstition that this is a rare, some Nag Devta, or linking it with some religious aspect, or creating an fabricated animal to create a panic. So I think as environment educators, it is our job not just to keep complaining that young generation is getting addicted towards social media and various other platforms, but also engage with younger generation, enable them how to navigate through these tools like social media platforms, and also equip them with various platforms and tools to ask questions, to check whether something which is spread as a viral post, whether it is true or a fake news. Fortunately, there are online resources available where you as well as students themselves can do fact checking whether something like these examples of flowers, trees, animals are genuine or fake. So this is an important and increasingly worrisome area we as environment educators should also deal with. Now let's come to some of the stories which we have learned a lot when it comes to nature conservation and specifically getting content for environment education. Most of the schools today are conducting plantation activities, and I'm sure in coming rainy season many of you will be engaged in plantation drives. While we are continuing with this important activity, as a learner community, we need to ask certain questions. Why we are planting? Which plants we are planting? How we decided that these specific plants need to be planted? And whether students are participating merely as freely available labor or a crowd, or as educators we are engaging with students, helping them understand the basics of tree plantation. Why to plant, where to plant, which particular species to be planted. If we are not doing, then we are not doing justice with environment education as well as the student community. And if we engage with them in exploring the neighborhood, exploring the area where plantation need to be carried out, let them talk to the people, let them search through the secondary information. What is the rainfall? What is the water availability? What kind of soil exists in your neighborhood? What kind of trees naturally existed? What kind of plants you really want to plant them? What is the objective? Are you essentially looking at trees to create shade? Are you essentially looking at plantation to support wildlife like bird or butterflies? Then specific species needs to be selected. If you are talking about regenerating local ecosystem creating biodiversity park, then you need to be extremely careful to having proper understanding what exactly you are talking about when it comes to ecosystem which you are planning to restore. Whether that ecosystem is forest ecosystem, grassland, scrubland or a wetland. Because if your intentions might be good, but if your actions are not informed by sound scientific principles or ecological understanding about the ecosystems, then there are a lot of unintended consequences, and consequently we have seen in many places adverse effect on the local biodiversity. So some of the examples let me share. In Pune, we have a quite strong local communities, citizen groups coming together for protecting Pune's hills. Tekdi Bachao Andolan or Tekdi Bachao movement is quite strong in city like Pune. I'm sure they are there in other cities as well. But with the enthusiasm to participate and conserve nature, what they have ended up is planting thousands of trees without understanding which species are appropriate for these Pune hills, whether Pune hills fall within the larger forest ecosystem landscape or the scrubland and grassland ecosystem. They have done a massive plantation without keeping even adequate distance between large trees like banyan and peepal trees. It doesn't make sense in planting large number of Arjun trees on a hilltop with a very poor soil profile, no water resource nearby. And in this process, what has happened, and this is not a new phenomena, thankfully for the Pune hills, city has a record going back to British period. Post-British period, social forestry plantations happened before this modern citizen-driven plantation activities. And what we have learned through these records, because of these unscientific plantation activities, Pune hills have lost as many as 80 or more local species. These are species of herbs, grasses and small plants, creepers. And we don't even know what impact loss of these local species have created on dependent other life forms such as insects and reptiles. So the intentions might be good, but unless and until we understand what kind of ecosystem is, doing large scale plantation can do more harm than the good. Similarly, Pune hills have thrown an interesting learning about role of fire and grazing on maintaining the biodiversity of these hills. So these hills essentially falling within the larger landscape and ecosystem which can be described as scrubland, grassland, open ecosystem, which over millions of years has evolved with fire resistant species. Fire, that is natural fire, which occasionally naturally occurs in these kind of ecosystem, actually helps in maintaining biodiversity, controlling population of invasive species. And some hills where still the local community engage in activities which create small scale fires, and also they continue their animal grazing. Some of the older species exist only in these patches, telling us the important role of fire and grazing animals, specifically in savanna or grassland, scrubland kind of a ecosystem, these elements play. So blindly considering that fire and animals are bad for biodiversity is also ecologically not true. There are many other examples even from the protected areas. And one example I recollect, which was shared and also later published by late Professor Madhav Gadgil in his books, is that from Bharatpur Bird Sanctuary and Kevladev National Park. Led by great ornithologist Salim Ali, nature lovers created a pressure on on the local governments to ban the local animal herder community from taking their animals for grazing in the Bharatpur, which is a wetland, thinking that animal grazing is bad, harmful for the birds, especially the migratory birds, for which this Bharatpur Birds Sanctuary once was world famous and is also declared as a natural heritage site by UNESCO. But understanding about the bird was narrow. Those experts, those ornithology experts, were not ecological experts looking at the wetland as an ecosystem and what different elements of these ecosystems play a role in maintaining a balance of wetland ecology. Unfortunately, the government of that time in 1980s went on putting the ban on grazing by adversely affecting the livelihood of local community. Local community obviously protested, and unfortunately, in violent response to this process, the state machinery ended up killing 9 local community members, and this happened as late as 1981. And in following years, what we experienced was not serene ecosystem which was welcoming and providing habitat for thousands of migratory bird species, but uncontrolled growth of invasive aquatic species or invasive weeds and degradation of the overall wetland, making it impossible for various bird species to use that wetland as their habitat, including for the migratory birds. This has proven as a quite expensive experience, not just in terms of time and money, but this experience has costed us 9 lives. And that's why we need to seriously learn from these experiences. So what were the learnings? The learning was, if you are only looking at birds as a specific community, you might be very well missing on a lot of other ecological principles, because you are not considering wetland as a whole, wetland as a complex ecosystem, and bird community as just part of it, ignoring the role of grazing animals in keeping the population of invasive weed in control, thereby providing scope for various other aquatic plants which were important for the birds, including migratory bird species, in terms of their habitat, their food, their perching grounds, and so on. There is a lot to learn from the local communities as well. Let me share example of one community, which is Phasepardhi. We call them ecosystem people. Phasepardhi, as we know, are traditional hunter-gatherer community. They possess immense knowledge of grassland ecosystems. This is both traditional as well as experiential knowledge. In Akola Washim region of Maharashtra, these communities played a key role in rediscovering and conserving endangered bird species, that of lesser florican, or tanmor as we understand in Marathi, or kalchido in the Pardhi language. Formal scientific methodologies of ecosystem surveys by way of transit samples or the other different scientific methods proved not useful even to locate presence of this endangered bird. It was declared as a locally extinct from state of Maharashtra for almost 100 years. But using Phasepardhi communities' keen observations and understanding of grasslands, we were able to not just rediscover, but along with the local organization called Samvedna or Feed today, they are conserving population of lesser florican in their natural habitat. We can also look at wetlands as an ecosystem and how we can learn from the local communities, especially those who are dependent for their livelihoods on these ecosystems. From this point of view, Vidarbha offers a quite interesting examples of Dhivar community. These traditional fisher folk communities are known by different names in different, even within Maharashtra and different parts of the country. Under state government's Maharashtra Gene Bank project, the Dhivar community led by local women, they demonstrated how the traditional and experiential knowledge of these communities play important role in restoring local wetlands over there. Where modern taxonomists and scientists struggled even to document and recognize all the aquatic plant species, traditional communities were able to rejuvenate a lot of local wetlands by way of developing protocols for reintroducing local aquatic plants which are critical if we want to rejuvenate local fish species. And through this initiative, these communities continue even today to conserve more than 50 local species of fishes with large scale promotion of monoculture practices by way of promoting major carp species like Rohu, Katla, Mirgal, and many of these indigenous fish species facing the dangers of extinction. It is these local communities who showed not just ecological understanding but the important active role towards rejuvenating wetland ecosystems and conserving local fish species. There are such community-based conservation initiatives and examples which are available throughout our country. As environment educators, we need to engage with these communities. We need to learn from these communities. And under Maharashtra Gene Bank project, we were able to establish the effectiveness of school-based learning, which is embedded in the local communities from which these students are coming from, proved effective, and we were able to also assess the pre-activity baseline and post-activity effect of it. So many of the schools in these areas undertook various projects for their students. The schools looked at grasslands, farmlands, wetlands as part of the students' habitat, and specific projects designed focused on these ecosystems were taken up. So students did mapping of biodiversity of these ecosystems. Students interacted with knowledgeable community members to understand specific skills like weaving of baskets or fishing nets. Students undertook projects of doing small quadrat studies and documenting the grass diversity. Students undertook projects of quantifying the grass availability in the community grasslands. Some students did projects on understanding the local livestock, what are their field requirement, and when these different groups with different project findings came together, sat, shared and discussed with the local community, they started exploring the local developmental challenge and also started talking about the potential solutions for the local developmental aspirations. So school-based projects which are embedded in these ecosystems, which are embedded in local communities, have this potential of effective environmental learnings. Because students come from these local communities, there is lived experiences of these students also they can bring into the learning process. When we are talking about the local ecosystems, local biodiversity and knowledge and practices, they essentially come in their local language as well, be it a regional Marathi or be it a Adivasi language like Gondi, Billi or Korku. So education as a process gives students this scope to bring their own understanding, bring their knowledge and become successful in terms of educational performance. And that is one key strength of habitat linked project based learning, which we need to understand as an environment educator community. Let me give you another example of how plantation activity can be designed into a long-term and meaningful initiative at the school level. We all know that plantation activity is often done without engaging students in deciding when, why, what about the plantation activity, as I mentioned. So, developing thematic focus for such plantation activities, and perhaps starting from seed collection to nursery development in the school and plantation, becomes much more meaningful and impactful activity than doing a plain plantation activity in the schools. What kind of thematic preferences we can do? Let me share our experiences of participatory initiative to study the genetic diversity of mango, Mangifera indica as a species. We all know that mangoes come in different size, shape, color, taste. But then our higher research institutions or even fruit research institutions have not done any comprehensive studies of varietal diversity of many of these important fruit plants like mango. It is true when it comes to other important tree species like jackfruit, karvanda. So we, in collaboration with more than 90 schools, were able to document more than 200 varieties of mango in Western Ghats landscape of Maharashtra. This is a 600-kilometer long stretch, which is a biodiversity hotspot of global importance, and this is something which no other research institution was able to do before. Working closely with the local communities and the local schools, organizing a simple nursery development and grafting workshops, it is very much possible to conserve the varietal diversity of these mangoes. And this is true in case of any species which is important culturally, nutritionally or economically. Varietal diversity of mango and focusing plantation activities for conserving the varietal diversity of mangoes in local village or a couple of villages can be one thematic focus. Similarly, one school can have what we call as ran meva, different plant species which children like to eat their fruits or flowers. So schools can have that thematic focus. For nursery and plantation, one may have focus to create butterfly gardens or plantations which will support fast vanishing insect pollinator population. Or someone may come up with a thematic project focusing on timber plants which are used for various activities, be it furniture. There could be a focus on firewood and focus on the local plant species which are used by yourself or a local artisan or carpenters, and they are fast vanishing. So create plantation activities on such a theme. If we are able to plan in this way, understanding ecological principle, be clear about our objective and essentially engage with our local community, then simple plantation activity becomes much more effective, not just in terms of ultimate impact of creating green cover, but also it plays an important role as a learning process. So during this process, students won't remain mere labor, but they are active participants and learners in this process of environmental conservation. Similarly, we can focus on something which is mandatory under Biodiversity Act. Even there is a need to create awareness about this particular act. Biodiversity Act mandates all three levels of local self-governance, be it panchayats, gram panchayats in the rural area or nagar panchayats and municipal corporations in urban area. As per the Biodiversity Act, it is their mandate to establish biodiversity management committees and create something called as People's Biodiversity Register, essentially engaging with local community, especially the local knowledgeable individuals, to not just create long list of different species, but also understand how local communities or peoplescape interact with landscape and waterscape in your jurisdiction. And we all know that often these Panchayati Raj institutions don't have local capacities to undertake this exercise. And this is where the role of schools and colleges become critical, because they can play a role of catalyst, also provide a platform to initiate, to create awareness about the people's biodiversity registration process, and also take part in documenting local biodiversity and creating something called a people biodiversity register, or it can be at a school level, which can be called as a children biodiversity register or school biodiversity register. With some of these case stories and ideas how we can design a meaningful environment education activity, let me take you a step ahead and look at the environment education in its complex nature and what we refer as education for sustainable development. As a school, there are international frameworks which have been developed to assess how green your school is. And this green doesn't only mean how much green cover you have by way of plantation or school gardens, but green school is a comprehensive framework which takes a whole school approach. There are international green school framework which is available, which was released by UNESCO, and there are various regional adaptations of such frameworks also. And anyway, you can take a look at these frameworks and these criteria and try to adapt for your own situation, your own school. But this green school framework essentially look at 4 broad areas of action you need to assess your school against. One is looking at school governance, whether green school and various objectives are part of your school policy and governance. There are systems in place. There is a mandate given. So school governance is one area. Second is facilities and operations. Whether your facilities are green, I mean these facilities can be conventional facilities like school building, but also going ahead and looking at open spaces, nurseries, the water resources, the waste management system, and not just these facilities but operations, whether the operations and maintenance also happen in a way that these facilities are used in an appropriate manner and maintained. Then the third area to look at is teaching and learning. And in our experience, this is perhaps more challenging relative to other thematic areas of this framework, because though activities like plantation, waste management, awareness rallies have become widespread in our country, the question we need to ask as an aspirational green school is whether we are able to integrate objectives of environment education in our formal curricular teaching learning processes or not. Fortunately, the educational policy provides the space and enables teachers to go beyond textbook and also integrate active learning processes such as project-based learning, which are linked towards our curriculum and syllabus. And this is where much needs to be done. Environmental education activities still largely remain as extracurricular activities, to be done in a eco club mode or to be done outside the curricular framework. And it is established that project-based learning process which is linked to the learner's habitat are effective not just in terms of achieving objectives of environment education, but they are also useful in improving the quality of formal learning process and strengthening the basic subject competencies among students as well, be it science, mathematics or language related subject competencies. We understood the significance of World Environment Day, how environment education has evolved from largely nature education to something like education for sustainable development. Let us resolve this World Environment Day to go beyond simplistic approach towards environment education. Let's go beyond simple plantation drives or awareness creation activities, and look holistically, have a whole school approach. And there are global and various regional frameworks which can aid us in doing that. There is a global framework released by UNESCO which is called as Green School Framework, which has green school quality standards, which essentially looks at 4 broad areas of action. One is school governance, whether creating a green school as a whole school approach is part of school policy. Then there is a second subject area which looks at various facilities, be it a building, be it a water resource, be it a solid waste management, be it open spaces, nursery also as an infrastructure or a facility, and how these facilities are actively used to promote green actions as well as engaging learners in learning about environment. The third domain of such green school framework looks at teaching and learning. Often we experience that environment education continues to be an extracurricular activity. But the key question now, with all the policy reforms, enabling schools and school teachers to go beyond what is there in textbooks, to connect learning process to the immediate environment, going beyond the school walls, connecting with the plants, connecting with the birds, connecting with the butterflies, connecting with the farmlands, connecting with the local community. So it is a critical question to ask as an environment educator community whether we continue to treat environment education as something extracurricular, nice to have, to celebrate certain days like World Environment Day, or we are seriously looking into teaching learning methods for dealing with our syllabus, be it a language, be it a science, be it a mathematics, be it geography or history. We are able to adopt approaches like project-based learning which connect formal learning process to the learner's environment. And the fourth dimension is that of community engagement. We all know that environmental challenge is not limited to the school campus and classrooms. The environmental challenges posed by the developmental process are not restricted to school as communities, but they are essentially larger societal challenges. And to deal with it, to learn from it, and also to strengthen environmental learning at the school level, whether we are engaging with local communities or not. So these are the 4 domains of Green School Framework. Let us resolve that we will adopt these such frameworks and try to convert our school into green schools. After understanding content of environment education, how we can design activities like plantation into much more meaningful activities, let us explore a little bit this 4th domain of community linkages. Why community participation in learning process is important. How we can do as a school-based community. So we need to really consider schools as platforms and also resource bank with various tools for community participation. We need to ask simple questions like local communities will have many knowledgeable individuals. So are we getting them as experts inside the schools to talk about grass or farming processes? Even waste pickers in our local community can become a resource person to talk about challenges of waste generation, waste hazard, and what actually happens with our waste, whether our systems are good enough to deal with this waste problem, what challenges and hazards they need to face as waste pickers who are doing valuable service to the community. There will be many such examples. We can have ecosystem approach. If we are focusing on wetlands as an ecosystem, we need to explore which are the key community stakeholders in wetland conservation and our learning process. So we essentially need to look at local fisherfolk community. We need to talk to the local farming community which depends on these wetlands for irrigation purpose. So these are key stakeholders. But also there are communities and stakeholders who might not be in large numbers and they are most likely to be marginalized in this process. For example, if we are talking about wetland conservation, are we looking at all those communities which are dependent upon wetlands, even the small like traditional washer community, dhobi community, who again not just dependent upon these wetlands or rivers and streams as their livelihoods, but we need to recognize that they are also providing a valuable service to the society as a whole. So what happens with the wetlands and how it impacts to these different stakeholders is also part of the learning process. Schools can play an important role in community outreach as well, making community understand why environment or specific ecosystems like wetlands or grasslands need to be protected. Schools can be places where communities can be invited, where students can present their posters on particular environmental theme, where schools can engage local community members also in joyful ways like playing games about understanding local ecosystem and practices which either support or harm local ecosystem, like ropes and ladder or snakes and ladder in many schools. As environment educators, you must be using such games to develop understanding about positive and negative actions about it. So we can also convert our school campuses as a small community learning festivals also. Students can also look at the traditional food diversities and what all is coming from either farm as ecosystem, either wetlands, grasslands or the forest as cultivated and non-cultivated food items. Simple activities like what's all in my plate, done across 3 generations by the students, documenting the food diversity of their own, food diversity of their parents' generation when they were of their age, and also grandparents' generation. And if we have such thalis created for 3 generations, these 3 thalis become an amazingly rich learning resource to talk about so many topics for environment education. We can certainly talk about how food as a culture is changing across the generation. Which are those food items which are changing or disappearing across the generations? Whether these changes are linked to changes in our local ecosystems, whether the changes are linked to the economic status of the households, or the changes are linked to the market and media influences. We can engage learners and communities together to understand impact of this particular cultural change, that is change in food habits or food diversity. How it impact our food culture, how it impact our individual health, how it impacts local economy as well. And this entire process, if done with community engagement, becomes much more richer, enriching both schools, teacher-student community as well as giving back to the local community. And there are various other action learning projects which schools can take. So for example, developing a water testing lab in the school, which essentially can be used for communities, community resource quality testing. Be it a drinking water source or a large wetland, schools can do regular quality testing and inform communities about quality standards and how it is positively or negatively impacting the health of those water resources. Similarly, schools can create vocational labs going beyond conventional activities like beauty parlors or bakery and some sewing activities. Schools can look at the wider community's need in terms of sustainable development and try to create learning courses and vocational labs within the schools. One example I would like to share, schools can easily create organic agricultural input producing lab using microbiology as a learning topic. So schools can certainly start small labs to develop trichoderma based microbial culture and different simple techniques using locally available material like different grain flours to create organic inputs for their farms. So this is a win-win collaboration with the local community, and for creating such local courses or vocational labs, I'm sure local community might come forward, putting financial resources to create such meaningful labs or any other learning facilities in the schools. So this is how we can look at community engagement when it comes to the Green School framework. And I would like to leave with you with hopefully a better understanding about evolution of environment education and how we can adopt a whole school approach when we look at the green practices at our school. And we wish all of you very best on this occasion of World Environment Day, and to make valuable contribution to this global movement of green schools and contributing towards sustainable development process. Thank you.